Let's take a minute to look at some basic economic concepts. There are several key economic concepts which we will look at throughout this course. First, rational self-interest. The idea of rational self-interest is that each of us is motivated by things that provide us with the greatest amount of pleasure, usefulness, or utility. Adam Smith is considered the founder of modern economic thought. Indeed, his chief contribution to economic thought is that individuals are motivated by rational self-interest. Adam Smith was a professor of moral philosophy at the University of Glasgow in Scotland. His profession as a professor of moral philosophy is perhaps significant because it suggests that he was interested in studying about what is the moral or the correct way to live and interact with fellow human beings. Many of Smith's views were formed by a French group of economic thinkers called the physiocrats, who advocated for the idea that goods and services should freely cross political lines. Smith's most important book, An Inquiry into the Nature and the Causes of Wealth of Nations, is sometimes referred to as the Wealth of Nations. Many economists argue that the Declaration of Independence is a document inspired by the Wealth of Nations. Indeed, it is interesting to note that the Declaration of Independence and the Wealth of Nations appeared in the same year, 1776. Let's take a moment and see what Smith wrote about rational self-interest. It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own self-interest. We address ourselves not to their humanity, but to their self-love, and never talk to them about our own necessities, but of their advantages. What Smith is saying here is that when we go to board something, we don't say to the clerk, "Let me have this pop because both you and I are human beings," or that I'm thirsty. What we do is we offer the clerk money for the pop, which is what the clerk wants. We are appealing to the clerk's or the store owner's self-interest in getting money. Now, it may sound like Smith is not worried about the larger community. However, he is really concerned about the larger community, and so let's see what he has to say about self-interest and supporting the larger community. Smith writes in The Wealth of Nations, "He generally indeed intends to promote the public interest, nor knows how much he is promoting it. By referring the support of domestic to that of foreign industry, he intends only his own security, and by directing that industry in such a manner as to produce may be of greatest value, he intends only his own gain, and he, in this, as in many other cases, is led by an invisible hand to promote an end which no part of his intention, nor is it always worse for the society that was no part of it. By pursuing his own interest, he frequently promotes that of society more effectually than he intends to promote it." Notice what Smith is saying. He's saying that individuals, by pursuing their self-interest, will be led by an invisible hand to promote the general interest. Individuals don't intend in helping the community, but by pursuing his own interest, he frequently promotes a society more effectually than he intends to promote it. Smith's statement is powerful because it suggests that economic well-being is best left up to individuals, and the government might inhibit economic growth. As we shall see, Smith's basic idea of business and individuals are best left to pursue their own self-interest will stay with economists until the 1930s and will return to the forefront in the late 1970s. Let's take a look at one of the most important parts of economics, and that is models. Models are simplified representations of reality, which are designed to incorporate the basic features of reality but omit some of the detail or assume that things are unchanged and thus not included in the model. Most economic models are mathematical or graphical in nature. Thus, many of the topics covered in this course are often treated in a mathematical or graphical way. Ceterius Paribus, this is a Latin phrase meaning everything else equal. Economists use this statement to indicate that some parts of a model are held constant or the variables are not allowed to change. One ways economists simplify economic analysis is to change the values they plug into the models only by 1. This idea of an increase by 1, the value of the model, is called marginal thinking because by adding one to the value in the model, it becomes easier to see changes in the outcome of the model. For example, a classroom has 30 desks. A professor has only one person in the classroom and lectures on a topic to that person, and then measures the student's understanding. Next, she invites 2 students to her lecture and measures the outcome. By continually adding more students, one at a time, she can measure the impact of her teaching. The fallacy of composition is the mistaken assumption that what happens to one person does not necessarily apply equally when everyone else does it. This idea will become a little bit important when we study something called the paradox of thrift. Another important thing to keep track of in your mind when you're looking at data and graphs is the idea of causation and association. Association means that 2 events happen together but are really unconnected with each other. For example, Sue notices when she leaves her house every day at 8 a.m. there's an airplane in the sky over her house. Does this mean that Sue has supernatural powers and by leaving her house she can cause airplanes to appear in the sky? Or does it mean that airplanes cause Sue to leave her house? Either situations are unlikely. More likely, there's some other explanation. Sue may live near an airport or under a flight path used by airplanes. This example of association is important because there's a factor that accounts for the presence of airplane over Sue's house. Causation means that one event causes another. A stop sign causes drivers to stop before proceeding on, assuming all drivers follow the law. Let's look at positive and normative statements. A positive economic statement is a statement of economic reality or reanalysis of reality. Positive statements are value neutral and do not contain any averages or weights that describe something. Positive economic statements are testable by experiment and can be shown to be true or false. An example of a positive economic statement is, as the wage rate increases, workers are willing to work more hours. This is a positive statement for 2 reasons. First, there are no adjectives describing whether this is good or bad outcome. Secondly, the statement is testable by experiment. We could offer workers various wages and see how many hours they would be willing to work. Normative economic statements reflect the value of the statement. They contain adjectives like good, bad, best. The word should sometimes acts like an adjective as well. An example of a normative statement is that Congress should increase the minimum wage to $25 per hour to eliminate poverty in the United States. The statement is normative because it's saying this is the way it should be. This is not the way things are. Let's take a look at some various types of economics and economists. There are 2 basic types of economics, microeconomics and macroeconomics. Microeconomics is the study of how individual economic entities like individuals, firms, and industries allocate scarce resources. Macroeconomics, as the prefix macro suggests, deals with the big economic picture. Most of the time, it deals with aggregates or totals. Macroeconomic deals with scarce resources are allocated or distributed within an economy as whole. Macroeconomics deals with regional, state, and nationwide economic questions. There are several other areas of economics worth knowing about. First off, there is econometrics, the application of statistical techniques to measure economic activity and to check the accuracy of economic theory. International economics, the study of international trade. Developmental economics, how economies grow and develop. Historical economics, the study of the history of economic thought and studying economic situations in the past. Public sector choice, which studies how governments make economic choices. Welfare economics, how income is distributed within a society. Comparative economics, the idea that you can study 2 different types of economic units and see their structure, how they structure their resource allocations. And finally, a new field, behavioral economics, which studies human economic behavior. In the macro world, economists often disagree on how the economy works and how best to deal with economic problems. Economists with similar views about the economy are often grouped together into what are called schools of thought or just schools. The 2 basic views or schools of thought are the freshwater school and the saltwater school. The freshwater school gets its name from the fact that many of its adherents were teaching or were students at the University of Chicago on Lake Michigan. The saltwater school gets its name from the fact that many of its adherents either teach or were students at a university on either the Atlantic or the Pacific coast. Freshwater economists believe that the economy is generally self-correcting. Depressions and recessions will come to an end quickly and will not be very deep. Wages, interest rates, prices adjust quickly and to changing economic conditions. Governments should not interfere with the economy, if at all possible. The government should always have a balanced budget, no deficit spending. Unemployment will quickly rise and quickly decline in a recession, and government intervention is to blame if it does not change quickly. Individuals are rational in their judgments. Say's law, which we will see later, the idea that supply of goods creates its own demand, which makes sense because some firms are supplying goods they need to hire individuals to produce. Those individuals now have income to spend, at least in part, upon the goods that they produce. For example, auto workers earn money building cars, and they in turn spend money on cars they produce. Some important freshwater economists are Adam Smith, F.A. Hayek, Milton Friedman, Thomas Sowell, and Walter E. Williams. Saltwater economists generally follow the ideas of John Maynard Keynes. Keynes believed generally in the self-correcting nature of the economy, but argued there may be times when the economy is not self-correcting. Wages, prices, and interest rates may not be very flexible, or they are sticky. Unemployment may be high and last a long time. The government may need to intervene in the economy to create demand through spending and tax breaks, and the government deficit spending is okay in the short run. Individuals may not be entirely rational in their economic decisions, the so-called animal spirits. Aggregate supply is not as important as aggregate demand. Some important saltwater economists are John Maynard Keynes, Paul Krugman, and Robert Reich.